on there. Hey, welcome to the show. My name is Peter Durnan. I'm a high school teacher in New Hampshire. It's a pleasure to be here with David Jolliffe, who is going to share some thoughts with us tonight. David?
Thanks, Peter. Well, one thing that I've been working with over the many years is to try to figure out what's good and what's bad about the 5-paragraph essay. Now, I know we always teach it to our students. It's something relatively easy to teach, and we say this will get them like the first foot into the door on the examinations, on the first foot in the door in academic writing. And a lot of my colleagues at the university level really poo-poo the 5-paragraph essay. They say it's like reductive, it does not engage the readers, it's more lecturing the readers than it is interacting with them. And I say, yes, that is true. But I also want to say, do not hear me saying that David Jolliffe says never teach the 5-paragraph essay. Throw it completely out. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying what we want to understand is what is it? And the 5-paragraph theme, in true sense, is really not an essay. The 5-paragraph theme is an exam answer. So what I want students to do when they're taking AP English language is I want them to be able to understand that when they're looking at those free response questions, the synthesis question, the rhetorical analysis question, and the argument question, would any of those questions actually call for an exam answer rather than an essay? And the answer is yes. And where an exam answer gets called for is in question 2 on the rhetorical analysis. Because at that point, what you're really not doing is you're really not trying to persuade an audience to agree to your thesis. What you're trying to do is just to show your examiners, who tend to be really good high school teachers and college teachers, that you know your stuff about rhetoric. You know how rhetoric works. So I want you to understand that even though that there are 3 kinds of free response questions on the examination, there are really only 2 genres called for. One is an argumentative essay, which is question 1, the synthesis, and question 3, the argument. And question 2 really calls for an exam answer rather than an argumentative essay. So Peter, if you want to go ahead and bring up the first slide, I'll just sort of take it from there.
Yeah, I'm happy to do this. And as I'm making my way here, oh, that's not where I want to be. As I'm making my way here, I just want to point out, David, I know I've used a few of your books. This is possibly a chapter in a new book?
Well, it's currently a chapter in Jolliffe and Ross Kelly, Writing America, Language and Composition and Context, which was published by Pearson, but now it is dead. Pearson has chosen not to proceed with further editions of it, and they are phasing it out. So this is now going to be a chapter in a new book that Hepsi Ross Kelly and Bernie Phelan and I are writing. It's a book of chapters for teachers about some things that we like to teach. So this will be a chapter in a new book for teachers about teaching high school English in general and AP English Language and Composition in particular. So here's just some stuff with my hair, when I used to have more hair than I do now, and it was browner there.
Oh.
But that's a little bit to go on. But no, here's the beginning of the gist here. So given the amount of attention we pay to understanding the rhetorical situation, and obviously that's the first of the big ideas on the course and exam description, wouldn't it be wonderful if students taking the AP language examination could envision themselves in a real rhetorical situation, engaging in a genuine rhetorical transaction, in other words, as real writers, not simply test takers. So that's the challenge. Let's say you're real writers, not just test takers. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So, as I say, the road to this realization basically comes back to the rhetorical situation. Now, I want to pause just for a second and let folks know that I look at the rhetorical situation in a slightly different way than the course and exam description does. The course and exam description looks at the rhetorical situation as having 6 elements. They include the message in it. I don't. I say the message it's not part of the rhetorical situation, it's what emerges from it. But here are the 5 things that I say are in the rhetorical situation. What's my exigence? In other words, as a writer, taking the examination as 16, 17, 18-year-old kid taking the examination, what's my exigence? What's my psychological motivation? Who am I as a writer? Why should people believe in me? Who's my audience? Why might they be interested in what I have to say? How can I kindle their interest? What's my purpose? What action do I intend to accomplish for the audience? Do I intend to amuse them, persuade them, teach them what I want, what's my purpose, and what's the context. When is this writing happening and who's participating in it? So I say, given the answers to all these questions, the big question is, what genre should I produce? So go ahead and switch, Peter. Now, okay, so what's a genre? Well, the genre has gotten a lot of play in the past 10 years or so. It's one of those fancy French words. You can say genre and then swallow the R. But, you know, there's no need to overcomplicate it. Let's take a look at it in two ways. In one way, at the simplest level, it's a type of text. Think about the things that we call a genre: a short story, a letter, a sonnet, an editorial. But there's a more useful way to think about genre. And that is to think about genre as a tool that writers use to do business. I'm putting that in quotation marks, you know, do business with their audiences and the communities they belong to. So if you're in a situation, what's the best genre for you to produce? So go ahead and go to this next one where I have kind of fun. So writers intuitively know that they want to pick the right tool, the right genre for the work they do. For example, suppose you're getting lousy service from your local electric company. As a writer, what do? Do you go home and write a poem about it and send it to your grandmother? No, of course not. You write a letter of complaint and send it to the electric company. So take this as the key to what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to say, what's my exigence? Who's my audience? Who am I as a writer? What's my purpose? What's the context? Therefore, what is the genre I ought to produce? Now, let's take this and apply it to the AP English Language Examination. What genre should students produce during this examination? What's the right tool? So here I go, I want to unpack this, but I've already said it a bit. So I say, even though that there are three free response questions that are essay questions on the exam, there are only really two types. Number one, synthesis, and number three, call for students to write an argumentative essay. And that's where you want to decide, you're designed to persuade a generally thoughtful, well-educated audience to understand and buy into their thesis, their main point. And the big difference is that in question one, you have to incorporate at least 3 sources that we give you out of the 8 or 9 into your argument. Question 3, you simply use your reading, your experience, and your observations. Question 2, which is a rhetorical analysis, requires the students to produce what I call a test answer or an examination answer. And what are you doing there? You're designed to show you the reader, examiner, grader, that students know the material they were tested on. Think about then, just ponder for a second, the difference between those two genres, argumentative essay and examination answer. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Peter. So here I have a table. Feel free to distribute, quote, and duplicate. I try to put this out in terms of the 5 elements of the rhetorical situation that I work with. What's the exigence, writer, audience, purpose, and context for question 1 and question 3, which are the argumentative essays, and question 2, which is the rhetorical analysis. Notice the exigence for question 2. You're taking a test. You need to show your examiners you know your stuff. That's what's sticking in your craw. I mean, let's be frank about it. That's what you're doing. Writer in question 1 and question 3, you're a young writer who wants to be heard in a community of thoughtful adults. Question 2, you're a high school student studying rhetoric. You want to demonstrate you know how texts work and create meaning, purpose, and effect. So I won't read it through, but I try to distinguish in that table what are the 5 elements of rhetorical situation and how they differ from questions 1 and 3, which call for an argumentative essay, whereas question 2 essentially calls for an exam answer. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So some students apparently think that the 5-paragraph essay is the only genre available to them. It's the best tool to accomplish the kinds of business on the exam. What is the 5-paragraph essay? It's essentially a very good genre to use if you want to write a test answer or an examination answer. In other words, you want to show your reader, examiner, grader, you know your stuff. What is it? Oh, by the way, so it works really well on the rhetorical analysis. It begins with an opening sentence to draw the reader in and then moves right to its thesis. There are then 3 body paragraphs that present evidence demonstrating the thesis. And then there's a usually brief conclusion that wraps up the piece, generally reinforcing the thesis and its development. Just a footnote. The genre has roots in classical rhetoric, but gained a strong foothold in 19th century pedagogy. I'll pause just for a second and say essentially it was developed in 19th century American colleges because it was fast and easy to grade. That's why the 5-paragraph theme was developed. It was developed because there were adjunct faculty members, graduate students teaching composition, and they wanted a genre that was fast and easy to grade. Therefore, they invented the 5-paragraph theme. But the United States of America is the only country in which it's taught extensively. Janet Emig, a scholar in composition, used to refer to it as the 50-star theme. So what's the difference? A better genre to use for Q1 and Q3 is the 6-part oration. I want to put scare quotes around oration. It's not really a speech. It was initially described by Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero, in his book De Inventione. He was 18 years old when he wrote it, written about 84 BC. And here are the 6 parts. Notice not 6 paragraphs, 6 moves you make. In the exordium, it's literally the web that draws the reader into the speech. You introduce the subject at hand and include the material that would make the audience both attentive and receptive. The narration, this is an interesting bit that's not in the 5-paragraph theme, where you offer a little background material. I could talk about this. Here's what people expect me to talk about, but here's what I really want to talk about. The partition would divide the case, make clear which part or parts the speaker was going to address, which parts the speaker would not take up, what order would be followed. So that really, a good writer can do parts 1, 2, and 3 in a solid first paragraph. So that's essentially, you're getting to your thesis a little more slowly than you would in a 5-paragraph theme, but you're drawing folks in. Then what do? You confirm your thesis. Your confirmation offers points to substantiate the argument, provide reasons, details, illustrations, examples. The refutation would consider possible objections to the argument and its supporting points. That's your counter argument. And then the peroration, the graceful conclusion, would draw together the entire argument and include material designed to compel the audience to think or act in a way to consonant. So then if you, on the next screen, Peter, I give some more contemporary language. What are the 6 moves? You contextualize the issue at hand for your readers. Let them know why your topic's an important one for them to consider. Second, you provide some background information to your topic. Briefly, you sketch out what's the going wisdom or word on the street. What do people generally talk about? Third, you divide your topic into smaller chunks, then commit to developing one of them. Your thesis, mapping out for your reader what you intend to say or intend to do. If any of you know Jerry Graff and Kathy Bergenstein's little book called They Say, I Say, notice those first 3 points are essentially they say, I say. They say this about the topic, but here's what I want to say. They say, here's going wisdom, but here's what I want to say. So it's very consonant, those first 3 moves with they say, I say pedagogy, which I admire a great deal. And then generate points to support, anticipate objections and address them, conclude by doing 2 things. Now, it's interesting. I've been teaching for 42 years, and I still don't know whether I know exactly what a conclusion is. But I think a conclusion has to do 2 things. It has to address the so what question. So what are the implications of your thesis? How are your readers better off for having read it? And that sounds like a conclusion. Like at the end of a movement when the orchestra goes dump, dump to dump. That's what a conclusion has to sound like. You do not need to restate your thesis generally. And if people are teaching you to restate your thesis, don't do it. Because your reader can remember your thesis. It's only been 4 or 5 paragraphs earlier. But there's that sense of what a conclusion is supposed to do. So if you take a look at there's a couple of prompts that are in the course and exam description. One that is offered for rhetorical analysis is Condoleezza Rice's graduation speech to SMU, Southern Methodist, on May 12th. And so here's a kind of an outline of a 5-paragraph theme, which does rhetorical analysis. Look at the first paragraph. In her May 12, 2012 speech to the graduating class of Southern Methodist University, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice creates effective metaphors to describe the imminent death of a flawed idea about difference, employs personification to characterize 2 negative attitudes about that the graduate should shun, and concludes with vivid historical and personal details, all to persuade her audience that they should join the legions of impatient patriots and optimists who are working toward a better human future. So that, your first paragraph sets out what are you going to do. So your second paragraph is about those metaphors, about difference. The third paragraph is about the personification of agreement and its twin brother entitlement. The fourth paragraph is about the details from U.S. history and her personal life. all of them linking back to this notion of the optimism for the future. And then the fifth paragraph is a brief conclusion about the ongoing importance of adhering to the attitudes Rice promotes. By the way, if any of you are perplexed or would like more information about how to write a good 5-paragraph theme of rhetorical analysis, take a look at Tim Friedis's examples of writing rhetorical analysis. He has really good instruction about how to write conclusions of rhetorical analyses. So I'm going to tip my hat to Tim.
Nice.
So that's that's your straightforward. Now, on the other hand, in the course and exam description, we have a prompt from Barbara Jordan, in which Barbara Jordan talks about the dangers of fragmentation into private wants, and therefore that destroys the unity of the country. Pretty typical argument question. Great prompt to work with. Very successful prompt to work with. So here's first 2 paragraphs in which I try to get the first 3 moves into the first 2 paragraphs. So those first 3 moves, exordium, narration, and partition, ending with a thesis in 2 paragraphs. Yvonne Jackson figures there must be a decent light somewhere in this kitchen, in this space she's never encountered before. An 11th grader at Lindblom High School in Chicago's back of the Yards neighborhood. Yvonne has a calculus assignment that's due tomorrow, and she needs a light and a table so she can spread out her work. But she has no clue where to find these things. Her mother has dropped her off and her 2 little brothers at a friend's apartment, while she goes off to work the 4 to midnight shift at Regis's restaurant. This strange lay of the land experience is nothing new to Yvonne. She experiences it 2-3 times every week. In her U.S. history class, Yvonne has read the stirring words of the former representative from Texas, Barbara Jordan, warning of the great danger our nation faces if different factions, city and suburb, regions, individuals, sacrifice the ideal of national unity by each seeking to satisfy private wants. Yvonne understands Ms. Jordan's point in the abstract. Americans probably do want to be one nation. Yvonne wishes that someone or some entity, the government or business or the nonprofit sector, would realize that she and millions of other young people like her in the U.S. have private wants that are not wishes for fancy extras. They are rather just essential needs that students need to succeed at work and beyond: a stable place to sleep at night, a relatively quiet location to do homework, promise of a decent meal, and a guaranteed safety from physical danger. There, you've got the beginning of an honest-to-God essay. Now, Peter, have you ever read question 3 on the exam?
Yeah, I have, actually, yes.
If you got an essay like this on the afternoon of day 4, what would you do?
It's a thrill when students strike out in their own direction, right? They
Absolutely.
tend to be very timid, and they tend to want to meet that 5-paragraph essay to say one example from here, one example from there, a third example from somewhere else. And this, as you say, it's more of the essay. Yeah.
Yes. I think the idea about writing good essays, good argumentative essays, this above all else, be interesting. Be interesting. And I don't know how many kids are going to take the exam this year. Now, last I checked, there are almost 600,000. If you choose to write the very first thing that comes to your mind, the very first thing that comes to your mind is going to be the first thing that comes to mind of 599,999 other students. Here, what do you really want to argue? Make this prompt your own. So that's just my sense of the 5-paragraph theme. I'm saying do not dismiss it. It's a very good thing to use for rhetorical analysis. But in question 1 and question 3, if you can write an honest-to-God essay, an argumentative essay, draw people in, engage them in the exordium, say what other people might want to say, but here's what I really want to say, and then develop it from there, you're going to be in good shape. Is there anything else I got? Okay, to conclude, here's my graceful conclusion. 5-paragraph theme is a good genre to use when you're taking a test and you want to show the reader, examiner, grader you know the material you're test on. The 6-part oration is a good genre to use when you're writing an argumentative essay and you want to persuade your readers to understand and buy into your unique, compelling main idea, your thesis. And I think that's it, Peter. That's what I had to say.
David, I've been following your thinking on this for decades, and you've always said, the best exam essays are not exam responses; they're more essays. So this sort of confirms what you've said for a long time. Thanks, Fawn. Let's wrap this up. Thanks for another good night.